Hello. Now, today we're going to be turning this old Triang R649 whiskey grain wagon into this much more acceptable version of it. But before we do that, I just want to say thank you for all the positive feedback from the last video, which was chatting about experiences on the railway. I've got more of those lined up for future episodes, but in the time being, it's back to modelling. The aims of today isn't going to be to turn this thing into a super detail, high quality model. It's just to do a little bit of surgery and bring it up to scratch. A bit of body work and swapping out the suspension units for Pedestal as opposed to the leaf springs. Adding a few bits of detailing like brake rodding and vacuum pipes, and then giving it a lick of paint. So let's get it all apart and see what we've got. We've got the chassis, the body and the roof. So this is a really simple, well, 4 parts really. Well, 6 I suppose if you count the wheels. Really cheap to produce. I'm doing 3 of these at the moment, and while I was taking one of them apart, I snapped a chassis in half. But because it's a generic chassis, I've got quite a few of these Hornby tankers that got the same chassis on them, so we'll be using that. So the first thing we're going to do is take the advertising hoarding structures off, just with a file. Now these were removed, I suspect, at about the same time as the suspensions were swapped from leaf to pedestal suspension in the early 1970s. That's unless you're doing the Alcan version, which kept their leaf springs right through to the end of their service careers. And they were the brown ones that did quite a lot of service, I think, in Scotland. It really didn't take that long to get all the extra bars off that I didn't want. Probably, I don't know, 25 minutes for all 3 wagons. The top of the wagon, or the roof, only needed a slight bit of cosmetic surgery in the form of just the one ejector pin mark on the top rib, which is easily squared off and made to look a bit more respectable. The last step on the body before we start putting stuff on is taking the ridge line halfway down the body, and I think that was moulded on to represent the brake rigging and the vacuum pipe. And once we've chopped all those out, the vacuum pipe will be the first thing we put back on, and we'll do it the same way as I did on the Southern Bee by chopping up lots of little bits of plastic rod and then pretending or making the illusion that it goes behind the ribs and spars. And then we'll do the same with the brake actuator rod on the other side, but that will be in a brass rod. Now I was going to get Bob to do this next snippet, but I can't get hold of him, so I'll have to do it again. So as we discussed in the Lima version of this model, the Lima one isn't that far out. The springs are a little off, but dimensionally it's pretty good. This Triang Hornby version isn't that far out either. The body is a little bit thin, probably 1.5 millimeters, but over the headstocks, over the buffer lengths, it's pretty good. It's not far out at all, even though it does share a generic multi-chassis with the tank wagon and various other things they've produced. Not so the case with the Bachmann model that was re-released a couple of months ago. Well, it wasn't actually the Bachmann model. Originally it was produced and tooled by Trix, and it wasn't to 00 or HO scale. It was a mishmash of somewhere in between, leaving that model somewhere short in all dimensions. That'll be length over the buffers and headstocks, and in height from the rail to the roof. It doesn't look too bad on its own, but when you put it next to other things that of comparable size, it looks woefully inadequate. That is my critical view of a model that should never have been re-released. It should have been retooled into something much more befitting of today's standards. But, you know, that's only my opinion. If you're happy with them, then that's fine. Me personally, I can make 3 of these old Triang Hornby ones look fairly reasonable for the same price as one Bachmann model. And while I've been rambling on and moaning on about Bachmann models, we've hacked the chassis to bits, and it's nearly ready to have some replacement suspension units added. Now the first type that I have is these ones from 51L, and I also have a set from Cambrian as spares. Now there's probably several different types of this sort of type of suspension, and I'll probably get slated for not knowing the differences between them all. However, they do look the same, and they look the same in the pictures, so I'm going with them, and hopefully that will take away some sort of notion that I'm a rivet counter. I had to file away a bit of the back of the sole bar to get them to fit right, so that so they weren't splayed out at an angle when you put the wheels between them. I suppose I could have alleviated that problem by sinking the brass bearing cups into the moulding, but I've only just thought about that idea just now. But, you know, we live and learn. It was far easier to attach the Cambrian kit parts as opposed to the 51L cast metal parts, simply because, well, gluing plastic to plastic is a lot easier than gluing metal to plastic. But on the other hand, the 51L white metal parts were far cheaper than going down the Cambrian kit parts route. Now, saying that, it might have been a little bit easier if, when I went to the store last to get some epoxy glue, that I got rapid, fast setting stuff as opposed to the slow setting stuff that took hours. Hindsight also told me that it probably wasn't a good idea to chop up the wife's pegs and use them as clamps. Making sure that everything was dead square and dead flat was the next issue. It's a lot easier with a flat surface, and the way I do it is to, well, get the wheels on and then put it on a flat surface. You can see if there's any discrepancies in the wheel alignments because you get a gap and no shadow. The last thing for the chassis was to construct a thing that looked like the underneath side of the hopper. Again, I wasn't that concerned that it wasn't exactly right, just so that it looked right. It was then off to the paint booth, and my new favourite colour, not black, which is Revel number 9. I think it's charcoal. It's less harsh than black and doesn't require toning down. It already seems to be toned down black. I also gave the underside of the hopper body a coat of this as well. That was just to give everything that was white plastic a bit of a base coat, and making sure that all the nooks and crannies were covered, so that when the blue goes on and it inevitably misses some of the odd little corners, it just gives that appearance of being a fake shadow. Transfers, or decals if you prefer, were next applied, and they were a mix mash of Fox and Railtech, applied in the normal way by dipping them in a bit of warm water, laying them on, sponging them off, and then sealing them in with a coat of gloss varnish. Couplings were the next thing that I put on, and because I chopped off the large D coupling, the Hornby type, I replaced them with Bachmann 36025, the short version. I had to fill the hole that was left by the rivet with a piece of styrene rod tube, and then I had to then drill that out to the correct size for the screw that I used. And then the short ones look a bit short, but there's plenty of give in them to go round even the sharpest of corners. Final assembly after some detail painting is just the reverse of taking them apart. No tools needed because they just literally snap fit together. I was going to do some weather into these wagons, but this video is way too long as it is, so I'll just skip to the putting them on the turntable and then putting them on the railway. This was a fill-in project that I just did off the cuff because I got stuck with the XP64 coaches, and hopefully I'll get back into the groove with those ones, and they should be out next week sometime. So onto the railway and into revenue earning service. They in a train with the other two Lima versions that I did, and they don't look too bad at all. And that about wraps this one up. It's been nice talking to you again. Thanks for watching. See you next time.